Hello YouTubers and welcome to Novus Talks with me, your host Novus Gorvius. And there's an interesting aspect to the development and existence of Metroid Prime 4 that I want to talk about. And it's something that not a lot of people are discussing. Whether or not Metroid Prime 4 is the start of a new trilogy or if this is the end of the Prime saga. Now I'm someone who, if you've watched any of my videos up to this point, I've always talked about how I think we're going to get a new trilogy, because it makes perfect sense. You're bringing a franchise back after like 10 years essentially. Of course you're going to make multiple sequels. You're not just going to bring it back for one and leave it at that. But after watching a few discussions on YouTube recently, it started getting me thinking actually about what if this actually is the end. So we're going to delve into that a bit here. So basically this whole theory stems off of the idea that Metroid Prime 3 Corruption was the end of the main story, right? Phazon is destroyed, Dark Samus is no more, Aurora Unit 313 is dead, the pirates are essentially extinct, and the Metroid threat has been eliminated for the time being. And this is further confirmed by Metroid Prime Federation Force in the intro, where they state that Phazon is gone. So the main story is gone, and that's something a lot of Metroid fans have been struggling to figure out ever since the announcement of Prime 4. How is story going to work? Because yes, we know Psylocke is going to be the main villain and it's going to center around him, but that's just going to feel like a spin-off and not like a main story. How is it going to connect to the idea of a Metroid Prime? The purpose of this theory, this is where I think the idea of this being the last game comes into play. Retro Studios have done 3 games. They seem to always want to come back to do a 4th one. And we know Tanabe has always wanted to do a 4th one. Ever since Metroid Prime 3, he's talked about how he wants to do a game on the relationship between Samus and Psylocke. And now we're getting it. But if you factor in Metroid Prime Hunters and Federation Force, then Prime 4, canonically speaking, is the 6th Metroid Prime game. So Tanabe obviously is counting Hunters and Federation Force as part of the main story. So with that in mind, we could theoretically see this being the end, because what if maybe the point of Prime 4 is we delve into how Phazon came to be. Psylocke is going to be a threat. We're going to learn about his past relationship with Samus. And the game ultimately is going to be about tying up the loose ends of the trilogy, like we seem to think originally was going to be the plan. And so, if that's the case, what happens next? After Metroid Prime 4 comes out, what happens? Because Mario has a 2D series and a 3D series. Zelda has a 2D and a 3D series, and arguably Zelda is going to get split into another series because of Breath of the Wild. And Metroid has a 2D series and a first-person 3D series. They tried third-person with Other M and it didn't work, so first-person is the way to go. But what happens going forward? How can you make a first-person Metroid game and not have it be Metroid Prime? I'm not on about Prime 4. Prime 4 obviously will be Prime 4. It's going to be the game we all expect it to be. But after Prime 4, they're not just going to leave the first-person idea die, even if Metroid Prime as a saga is over. We're going to see more first-person Metroids, but how are they going to differentiate themselves from Prime? Or are they even going to differentiate themselves? And to be honest, as of right now, I personally think it's impossible to predict. Maybe Prime 4 introduces something that will give us a clearer idea, but as of right now, I can't imagine how they would change the formula significantly for a first-person game that isn't Prime. But to reel it in a bit here, going back to why Prime 4 might be the last game, is because, you know, Retro Studios have done 3 of these games before. Tanabe has done, this is his 4th game now, and they're not going to be doing these games forever. Obviously, Tanabe has a plan and he wants to see that plan through, but the Metroid series is going to have to continue without him at some point. And it's going to have to continue without Retro at some point, because Retro will have to work on other titles at some point. They can't just keep making Metroid forever, despite what we may want. And so it really leaves Metroid in an interesting predicament here. Like, where Do we go after Prime 4? It's way too early to be predicting this, but it is interesting to think about. I like the idea that of first-person Metroid becoming its own thing separate from Prime. But personally, aside from this theory, I think that's not going to happen for a long time. I do think Metroid Prime 5 will happen and Metroid Prime 6, and then they'll go in a first-person route. Maybe if it's extremely successful and if they somehow have a story, they'll do Metroid Prime 7, Metroid Prime 8 and Metroid Prime 9. Highly unlikely. I doubt they'll go past 6, but even still, at most they'll go up to 9. I cannot see them going past 9, but up to 6 is the main point, I think. So it is an inevitability that Metroid Prime will end. The story will be complete and they'll continue it in some other fashion. But the question is how? And you also have to take into factor the timeline. The Metroid Prime games are set between Zero Mission and Metroid 2. Interestingly enough, Metroid Prime 4 seems to be leaning closer to Metroid 2 than it is the Prime games. What I mean by that is Psylocke stole a Metroid, and we know this Metroid is going to play into Metroid Prime 4's plot. So we could potentially see the beginnings of why the Galactic Federation thought the Metroids were so dangerous they needed to be wiped out. Like, Metroid Prime 4 is going to be showing us the beginnings of what happens that these creatures become so dangerous they need to be exterminated. And I don't know if that's going to be stretched out over a trilogy. I do believe it, but as I said, there's the possibility that Prime 4 is the last game. That will be the swan song for the saga. Even if this is the end, I don't think fans will accept it as the end. I personally feel like a lot of fans will, if the game comes out and it's absolutely an incredible masterpiece like we expect, then of course we're going to want another sequel. But I guess as well, it depends on how the story unfolds. If it has more of a connection to the original trilogy than we think, then maybe we want it to continue. But if it feels more like the spin-offs and it's more a smaller story that just so happens to be tying up the loose ends of the Prime trilogy, such as Psylocke, then maybe we don't want to see it continue. I don't know, these are just my thoughts and opinions. I'm sort of just throwing these ideas off the top of my head. Like I said multiple times, I don't believe this will be the end, but maybe when you start marketing the game, we'll get an idea. But until then, these are just my random thoughts. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section below. Do you think Metroid Prime 4 is the start of a trilogy? Do you think this is the final chapter? How will first-person Metroid evolve after the Prime saga ends? And just where will they go from that point on? I want to hear everything you have to say down in the comment section below. And yeah, with that all said, thank you all for watching and please subscribe. Novus Corvus out.